My name is Caroline Merritt. I am 43 years old, and on the morning of my 43rd birthday, my husband of 17 years slid a manila envelope across the breakfast table, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "Happy birthday, Caroline. I think it's time we both moved on." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't knock the envelope off the table or throw the mug of tea I had brewed for both of us out of 17 years of habit, because that was the kind of woman I had always been, the one who made 2 cups, even when only one of us deserved it. I picked up the envelope. I opened it with 2 fingers along the sealed flap. I read the first page of the divorce filing carefully. I set it down beside my plate, and then I said, very quietly, "All right." He looked surprised. He had been expecting tears. He had been expecting pleading, perhaps a raised voice, perhaps the performance of devastation that he had, I imagine, rehearsed for in his head for weeks. He'd been expecting the version of me that had spent 17 years softening herself to fit inside the shape of his life. What he did not know, what he could not have known, because I had made absolutely certain of it, was that 6 months before that birthday morning, I had already begun the quiet, deliberate, methodical work of making sure that when this day came, and I had known it was coming for over a year, I would be completely, legally, and financially ready for it. What they didn't know was that the house he handed me divorce papers in was no longer his to negotiate from. The accounts he thought I depended on were already documented and protected under my name. The business he believed I had abandoned to raise our children had been rebuilt, quietly and entirely, under a name he had never heard, generating revenue he had never seen. He served me papers thinking he was freeing himself from a marriage he had already exited in every way that mattered. He had no idea he was handing me the last piece of a puzzle I had already finished assembling without him. This is that story. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a neighborhood called Clintonville. Wide streets, mature trees, front porches with swing chairs that nobody used in the winter months, but that my mother always kept swept and clean. My father, Robert Haverford, was a certified public accountant who worked for the same mid-sized firm for 31 years. He was steady and precise and believed that a number told the truth even when people would not. My mother, Joyce, ran a small alterations and tailoring shop out of our converted garage for 22 years, from the time I was 3 years old until I left for college. She pressed fabric and pinned hems and stitched buttonholes and calculated invoices by hand at the kitchen table every Sunday night without complaint, without drama, and without any expectation that what she was doing was anything other than what needed to be done. She never confused her work with her worth. I watched her do this for 18 years. I learned the most important thing I have ever learned from that kitchen table. A woman who controls her own money, controls her own story. No professor ever taught me that. My mother taught me that with a pincushion in her hand and a ledger open beside the salt shaker. I studied finance at Ohio State University. I graduated in 2003 with a 3.8 grade point average and a concentration in investment analysis. In the fall of that same year, I accepted a position at Harmon and Breck Capital Partners, a mid-size wealth management firm with offices in Cincinnati. I spent 3 years at Harmon and Breck, learning how money moves through the world, how assets are titled, how trusts are structured, how the genuinely wealthy protect what they have built from the people who might want to dismantle it. I was good at it, not simply competent in the way people mean when they are being careful with their praise. Genuinely, demonstrably, measurably good. I was the analyst who read 3 pages further than everyone else in the room. I was the one who flagged the discrepancy buried in the back of a prospectus that everyone else had already passed. By my 5th year at Harmon and Breck, my supervisor, a woman named Deborah Lang, who was one of the most precise thinkers I have ever met, had formally put me forward for a promotion that would have placed me in charge of a $47 million client portfolio. I was 28 years old. That portfolio was mine. I could see it from where I was standing. I met Daniel Merritt at a colleague's wedding in September of 2005, held at a vineyard in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, that had been rented out for the weekend. He was 31. I was 26. He was tall, at ease in the way of someone who has never had to wonder too hard about whether he belongs in a room, charming in the particular way that certain men are charming, not calculating, just naturally gravitational. He worked in commercial real estate development. His firm, Merritt and Associates, had been launched 3 years earlier, with a $400,000 investment from his father, Roger Merritt, a man I would come to understand had spent his entire life ensuring that Daniel never had to build anything entirely from scratch. Daniel was interesting to talk to. He asked me real questions. He appeared to be genuinely interested in my answers. He made me feel, for a sustained and convincing period of months, completely and specifically seen. We dated for 2 years. I transferred to a smaller asset management consultancy in Hoboken during that time, a step down professionally, because Daniel's life and his business were in New Jersey and I loved him and believed that love meant rearranging yourself in the direction of another person. We married in June of 2007 at a vineyard in Napa, California, 112 guests. My dress was ivory with a low back and cost $1,800. We honeymooned for 10 days in Santorini, in a villa with a private pool overlooking the caldera. It was beautiful. I know that still, without confusion, holding the two truths at once. It was beautiful. And it was also the beginning of something I spent too many years refusing to name correctly. We settled in Westfield, New Jersey, on a tree-lined street called Elm Ridge Drive that smelled of cut grass in the summer and wood smoke in October. A 4-bedroom colonial, 3,200 square feet, hardwood floors throughout, a covered back deck with a gas fire pit that we used exactly 4 times in 17 years. The purchase price was $1,100,000. Daniel's father, Roger, put forward $220,000 as the down payment from a family account that had been designated for exactly this purpose. My name was on the mortgage and on the deed from the very beginning because we were married, and that was simply how it was done. I did not understand at the time how important that piece of paper would one day become. By the time I needed to understand it, I had been studying it for months. The gradual removal of my career from the picture did not happen in a single conversation or in a single ultimatum. It happened the way that important things often happen inside long, close relationships, slowly and then all at once. One gentle pressure accumulating on top of the previous one until the shape of what had happened was already complete before I had finished noticing it was happening. "You're gonna burn yourself out, Caro," Daniel would say, using the nickname I had never chosen and never corrected. "You work too hard. You don't have to. I make enough for both of us. And then, when we have children, you'll want to be present. I want you to be present. Isn't that what we talked about?" And then, when I was precisely 3 months away from the promotion that would have put me in charge of the $47 million portfolio, "Caro, it doesn't make sense to take on more right now. We are trying to start a family. We have talked about this. This is the plan." I stepped back from the promotion. I called my supervisor, Deborah Lang, and told her I was declining. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she said, very carefully, "Are you certain this is what you want, Caroline?" I said yes. I believe I meant it. I was 28. I thought I was choosing my family. It took me years and a great deal of distance to understand that a choice offered by someone who controls the economic foundation of the household is not really a choice in any meaningful sense. It is a question with only one acceptable answer, and the acceptability has been defined by the person asking it. Our daughter Margot was born in March of 2009. Our son Elliot arrived in August of 2011. They are, without any qualification, the most important work of my life, and I will not allow what Daniel became to put any shadow on what they are. Margot is now 14. She plays violin with a focused intensity that she did not get from her father. Elliot is 12, and he has a memory for numbers that makes my father Robert genuinely proud in a way that bypasses language. They are kind children. They are perceptive in the specific way that children raised by careful, paying attention mothers often are. They noticed far more of what was happening than I ever gave them credit for. They deserved better than what they witnessed inside that house on Elm Ridge Drive. They will have it. For the first years of our marriage, Daniel was not a bad husband in any way that would have been simple to document or explain to someone outside of it. He was present in the ways that men like him define presence, on their own schedule, in their own way, by their own measure of what showing up requires. He coached Elliot's youth soccer team for one season when Elliot was 7, and he was genuinely good at it, patient with the children and funny on the sideline, and I loved him for it. He remembered my birthday usually, with something expensive that his assistant Renata had selected, packaged, and sometimes signed the card for. He attended most of the school events and the concerts and the parent-teacher meetings most of the time, and when he did not attend, he had a reason that arrived already formatted into an excuse. He was not cruel. He was dismissive, which is a subtler and in many ways a harder kind of cruelty to name because there is nothing specific to point at. Dismissiveness is not an act. It is an absence. It is the space where attention should live, left consistently empty until the person waiting in that space begins, imperceptibly, to stop expecting it to be filled. The first time I understood with real clarity that something was fundamentally wrong was at a dinner party in September of 2017 at the home of Daniel's colleague Robert Calloway and his wife Patricia in Short Hills, New Jersey. 12 guests around a long mahogany table set with candles and ironed linen napkins. The conversation turned to commercial real estate and lending, specifically to how changes in the interest rate environment were affecting deal timelines and underwriting standards. I made a comment, something precise and specific, something I had read the previous week in an industry journal because I still read everything, market reports and economic analysis and financial commentary, because that is who I am regardless of whether anyone is paying me to be it or acknowledging that I am doing it. I said something informed about the relationship between inverted yield curves and short-term commercial lending appetite. It was a substantive and accurate observation. I know this because Robert Calloway looked at me across the table with what was clearly genuine surprise and said, "That is exactly right. Daniel, where on earth have you been hiding her?" Daniel laughed his easy, unguarded laugh and said, "Oh, she picks things up here and there. The way you might say it about a clever pet that has learned a word. She picks things up." I smiled across the table. I continued eating. Something inside me went very still and very specifically cold, and I put it carefully in the part of my mind where I keep things that need to be thought about later when I am alone, when there is enough quiet to look at a thing properly. The second incident was in March of 2020. We were refinancing the house, and Daniel was at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning going through the paperwork with our mortgage broker, a man named Craig Sutherland, while I moved in and out of the kitchen, managing the children and making coffee. At one point I stopped and asked a direct and specific question about the rate lock terms, specifically about whether the float-down provision would apply if rates dropped between the lock date and the closing date. Daniel did not look up from the document in front of him. He said, "Caro, this is pretty technical. You don't need to worry about it." Craig Sutherland glanced at me for exactly 2 seconds. I saw him do it. That's specific. Brief recalibration that every financial professional performs involuntarily when they recognize that the person being spoken over has considerably more expertise than the person doing the speaking. I said nothing. I went upstairs. I sat down at the small desk in the guest bedroom that had become, over the previous year, my quiet workspace. I opened my laptop, and I started writing down numbers. The third incident was the one that changed everything, permanently and without the possibility of reverting to what had been before it. It was a Tuesday evening in November of 2022. I was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway, standing in the dim light between the linen closet and the guest room door, when Daniel came home 45 minutes later than usual. He was on his phone. He was laughing the way he used to laugh with me in the early years, open and completely at ease. The laugh of a person who is fully comfortable with who they are talking to and not thinking at all about who else might be listening. He did not see me in the hallway, and I heard him say, clearly, without any lowering of his voice, because he did not know it needed to be lowered, "She has no idea, Soph. None at all. It's completely fine. I will handle it. Then he walked into the bathroom and the door clicked shut and the water ran for a very long time. Sophie. I had encountered the name twice in the preceding months. Once from Daniel in conversation, mentioning that a new project coordinator had joined Merritt and Associates. Once from a text notification that lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the garage, from a contact listed as Sophie C., which I did not read because I did not need to. The name had registered. The tone of the notification had registered. And standing in the dim hallway with a folded towel in my hands, listening to the sound of water running behind a closed door, I understood with complete and absolute clarity what I was dealing with. I did not need more information. I needed a plan. I did not confront him. Not that night. Not in any of the many nights that followed. I did not ask a single question about Sophie Chan, whose full name and professional LinkedIn profile I located within the week without any difficulty at all. Because she worked at my husband's company and the internet is a public record, I altered nothing in my daily behavior, my schedule, my tone at the dinner table, my availability on weekends. I said nothing that would have told him anything was different inside me, because I understood something with perfect clarity. The clarity of a woman who spent 3 years analyzing financial instruments specifically engineered to obscure what is happening beneath the surface. Confrontation would have triggered his defenses and cost me the only real advantage I held at that moment, which was that he had absolutely no idea I knew anything at all. So I chose the thing I was best at. I chose precision over reaction. I chose patience over visibility. I chose to build before he could burn. I chose the long game. The first thing I did was call Patricia Okonkwo. Patricia and I had met in a professional finance seminar in Cincinnati in 2001, when I was 22 and she was 24, and we were both the youngest women in the room by at least a decade. She was now the principal of a boutique CPA firm in Montclair, New Jersey. She was also the closest friend I had maintained entirely outside of Daniel's world, outside his colleagues, his social calendar, the dinners and gatherings he curated. I called her from the parking lot of Margot's dance studio on a Wednesday afternoon in late November of 2022. Engine running, heat on, watching other parents come and go through the studio door while their daughters tumbled inside. I told her everything. I spoke for 38 minutes without stopping. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How soon can you get to my office?" I said, "Saturday morning." She said, "Good. Bring every financial document you can photograph without him noticing." I said, "I already started." There was a pause. Then Patricia said, "Of course you did." I had spent the previous 4 evenings, on the nights that Daniel worked late or went to the gym, going through the folders in his home office and photographing documents on my phone. 23 documents in total across 4 file folders. Bank statements showing balances across accounts I had not previously had full visibility into. The incorporation papers for Merritt and Associates and its most recent operating agreement. Our joint tax returns for 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. The mortgage payoff schedule on Elm Ridge Drive. 2 brokerage account statements. I photographed each one carefully in the correct light. Transferred each file immediately to a secured folder on my phone, under a name that meant nothing to anyone who might be looking, and backed up every image to a small external drive that lived, from that point forward, inside a winter boot at the very back of my closet shelf. Patricia referred me to Susan Halliwell, a family law attorney in Montclair, who had been practicing in New Jersey for 21 years. Susan had, among her colleagues, a reputation for what one of them had once described to Patricia as surgical precision. She did not miss anything, and she did not waste time on things that were not going to matter. I met her on December 6th of 2022, at 3:45 in the afternoon, in her office on Park Street in Montclair. Her desk was entirely clear except for the folder of documents I had sent ahead of the meeting and a single legal pad with a pen resting on it. She wore small gold stud earrings and no other jewelry. I trusted her in the first 4 minutes, which is unusual for me. Susan reviewed everything I had brought, all 23 photographs, all the documentation. She read in complete silence for 11 minutes while I sat across from her and looked at the window and the November light coming through it and did not fidget. When she looked up, she said, "You have considerably more than you think you do. New Jersey divides marital assets equitably, which accounts for your non-financial contributions to this marriage. 17 years of household management and primary child care while your husband's business grew are quantifiable economic contributions. We will quantify them." She set the folder down. "Your career departure in 2008 is equally significant. Stepping away from a $47 million portfolio management role at 28 has a calculable lifetime earnings impact. We will calculate it." She paused. "But we need to move carefully. We cannot signal anything to him. No changes to accounts, no confrontations, no behavioral shifts he might notice." I said, "I know." She said, "Good. Now tell me about the business." I had mentioned Clearwater Financial Consulting in 2 sentences at the end of a long email I had sent Susan the night before our meeting, just enough to establish that it existed. I told her the full picture now. In January of 2023, 6 weeks after the evening in the hallway, I had opened a sole proprietorship registrip in New Jersey under the name Clearwater Financial Consulting, operating under my maiden name credentials, Caroline Haverford. My professional certifications had never expired. I had maintained them quietly over 15 years, renewing my continuing education requirements annually because giving up credentials that had taken years to earn felt, even during the deepest years of the marriage, like a line I was not willing to cross. Daniel had never thought to ask about this because he had never truly considered who I had been before he knew me. He did not know about the certifications because he had never asked. I began reaching out to former colleagues in January of 2023, carefully and only by email, through an address connected to my maiden name that I had maintained for years without any particular intention, a former supervisor who was now at a mid-size firm in Summit, a former analyst colleague who had started her own registered investment advisory group in Milburn, a former client from my Harmon and Breck years, a woman named Kathleen Marsh who ran a closely held family investment office in Princeton, who responded to my email within 2 hours, with words that I still have saved. "Caroline, I've wondered for years when you were going to come back. Let us talk as soon as possible." By March of 2023, I had 3 consulting clients. Monthly revenue was $4,200, flowing into a business checking account at a credit union in Montclair, where Daniel had no account and no reason to walk through the door. It was the most money I had earned in my own name in 15 years. I sat at the desk in the guest room on a Tuesday night after the children were asleep, and Daniel was watching something downstairs, and I looked at that number on the screen, and I allowed myself 60 seconds of completely private and completely genuine satisfaction. Then I opened the next client file. I want to stop here for just a moment, because if you are still with me, if this story is landing somewhere real and specific inside you, I need you to do something right now. Go to the comments and tell me one thing. Have you ever known that something was wrong, truly, quietly known it before anyone around you could see it? That specific, lonely, certain knowing, because that feeling matters. It is not paranoia, it is intelligence. Drop a comment below and subscribe so you never miss a story on this channel. I read every single comment. Everyone, now let us keep going. By September of 2023, Clearwater Financial Consulting had 9 active clients. Monthly revenue had reached $22,000. $12,000 of that went into a dedicated savings account. $8,000 went into a conservative investment portfolio that Patricia helped me structure with the specific protections that apply in a divorce proceeding under New Jersey law. I had also, in the spring of that year, done something that Daniel would have considered entirely impossible if he had known to think about it. Working with Susan Halliwell and a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb, I had formally commissioned an independent appraisal of the Elm Ridge Drive property and documented my co-ownership interest with full legal precision. The appraisal, completed in April of 2023, placed the property's current market value at $1,480,000. The remaining mortgage balance at that time was $870,000. The equity in the property, The equity in which I held a full and equal co-ownership stake from the day the deed was signed 17 years ago was $610,000. Every number was in a document. Every document was in two places: Susan's office and the winter boot. Daniel's understanding of ownership was based on a different model entirely. His father's money had made the down payment, his monthly salary had serviced the mortgage, his name appeared on the checks that built the business. In his internal accounting, those facts constituted ownership in the way that felt natural and obvious to him. He had not read the deed in a decade. He had not researched equitable distribution in New Jersey. He had not considered the possibility that the woman who made the coffee every morning and organized the school paperwork and sat in the back rows of conferences she had not been invited to attend had, also, somewhere during those 17 years, been reading the documents very carefully with both eyes completely open. In October and November of 2023, Daniel's pattern shifted into something more consistent and less concealed. He came home late, more than he came home on time. His phone was always face down. He had changed his passcode sometime during the summer, which I had registered and said nothing about. He was, I understood, fully invested in whatever his life with Sophie Chen had become. I had confirmed through public professional information only that she was 31 years old, had been with Merritt and Associates for 2 years, and worked as a project coordinator. I looked at one photograph, one time, and then I closed the page because she was not the variable I was working with. Daniel had made the vows. Daniel was the one I was dealing with. In November of 2023, Susan and I met for our 7th formal session. She had by then assembled the complete picture: the property equity, the business valuation of Merritt and Associates at $2,140,000 in appreciated marital value above its pre-marriage baseline, the joint investment accounts totaling $318,000, Daniel's individual retirement account, the joint savings of $84,000, and 11 months of Clearwater financial consulting revenue. She set the folder on the desk. She said, "When you are ready to file, Caroline, we are ready." I said, 2 more months. I want 1 full calendar year of Clearwater revenue documented." She nodded. She said, "Smart." That was the entirety of her editorial comment. December of 2023 was measured and careful. I finalized the annual accounts for Clearwater. I had a concluding call with Marcus Webb confirming that every aspect of my property co-ownership documentation was complete, current, and legally sound. I moved the last round of transfers into properly titled and documented positions. I wrote out, by hand, on 3 sheets of paper, a complete timeline of everything I had done since November of 2022. Every document photographed, every meeting attended, every dollar earned and protected. I folded the pages and added them to the winter boot. Then I closed the closet door and went downstairs and helped Elliot build a model of the solar system out of foam balls for his science project. I helped Margot practice the Vivaldi concerto she was preparing for her school's winter concert. I made dinner. I ate it across the table from a man who believed he knew exactly who was sitting across from him. In January of 2024, the school held its winter concert. The auditorium was warm and full. Elliot sat beside me in the 3rd row and whispered commentary about the other performers with the commentary of a 12-year-old who takes nothing seriously except the things he takes very seriously. Margot played beautifully. She wore a burgundy dress, and her hair was pinned back, and she had her grandmother Joyce's posture, the posture of a woman who stands straight regardless of what she is carrying. Daniel was not there. He had a work event, he said. I sat in the 3rd row and listened to my daughter play, and I thought, this is the last year, this is how it goes. Not because I was bitter, because I had decided. Then came February 14th, 2024. My 43rd birthday. Daniel was dressed before 7. Unusual for a Thursday when he had no early meetings. He had made tea for both of us, which told me, among other small things, that he had not registered that I had gone back to coffee 4 months ago, because the quality of attention required to notice that had not been available to him. He was composed in the way of someone who has been rehearsing something. He sat across the table. He pushed the manila envelope across toward me. It was not wrapped. There was no card beside it. He said, "Happy birthday, Caroline. I think it's time we both moved on." I picked up the envelope. I opened it along the flap. I read the first page. I set it down. I looked at him. I said, "All right." The silence that followed was not the kind he had prepared for. He said, "I know this is a lot to process." I said, "I appreciate you being direct." He said, "I hope we can handle this civilly for the sake of the children." I said, "I have always been civil." "Daniel." A pause. He said, "I've spoken with an attorney." I said, "Good. Mine will contact yours by the end of the week." He stared at me. He said, "You have an attorney?" I said, "I have had an attorney since December of 2022. He went still. He said very quietly, as though trying to locate something he was certain had been in its place, "How?" I picked up my tea. I said, "By paying attention, Daniel. I've always been very good at that." And I took a sip and looked out the kitchen window at the bare trees on Elm Ridge Drive, and I did not say anything else. 3 business days later, Susan Halliwell filed on my behalf in Superior Court. The filing contained the full asset inventory, the property co-ownership and equity documentation, the 15-year career impact analysis prepared by a certified forensic economist, the Clearwater Financial Consulting Incorporation and full revenue history, and the formal demand for a business valuation of Merritt and Associates. Daniel retained a family law attorney named Gerald Foss within 48 hours, and Foss contacted Susan's office within another 48 hours to request an early settlement conference rather than proceed toward discovery and litigation. I was not surprised. The settlement conference was on a Thursday in April of 2024. At a mediation firm in downtown Newark on the 14th floor of a glass office building overlooking the city in its specific, particular gray April light. Daniel arrived with Foss and a junior associate. I arrived with Susan and Patricia Okonkwo, who attended in her formal capacity as my financial advisor of record. Daniel looked at me when I walked in. I wore a charcoal blazer and dark wool trousers. My hair was pulled back. I sat down, opened my folder, and waited. What happened in the next 4 hours was not dramatic in the way courtroom dramas are dramatic. There were no raised voices, no accusations exchanged across the table. What there was instead was a methodical and complete dismantling, conducted entirely in the measured language of law and financial documentation, of every assumption Daniel Merritt had held about who I was and what I was entitled to. When Gerald Foss suggested that Daniel's down payment demonstrated a primary ownership claim in the marital home, Susan placed the joint deed on the table and slid it across without speaking. When Foss argued that my voluntary departure from the workforce weakened my spousal support claim, Susan placed the forensic economist's 15-year income impact analysis on the table and slid it across without speaking. When Foss attempted to dispute the business valuation, Patricia opened her folder and placed the independent assessment on the table, also without speaking, also slid across. At 10:47 in the morning, Daniel looked across the table at me. He said, "You planned all of this." I said, "I prepared for this, Daniel. That is different." He had nothing to say to that. The settlement reached that afternoon included my full co-ownership equity in Elm Ridge Drive, amounting to $304,000 after costs, spousal support of $7,500 monthly for 7 years, child support of $4,200 monthly for Margot and Elliot, a structured payment of $850,000, representing my share of the appreciated marital value of Merritt and Associates, payable over 5 years, and full sole ownership of Clearwater Financial Consulting, the existence of which Daniel's attorney had not known about until Susan placed the incorporation documents on the table at 9:23 in the morning, and both men's faces did something that I observed and then put away. At 1:47 in the afternoon, Daniel signed. His pen moved slowly. I did not watch his face. This moment was not for watching his face. It was for completing something I had started on a November evening in 2022, standing in a hallway with a folded towel in my hands, and it was done now. 14 floors above a city that had no idea any of it had ever been happening, because that is how the real work always goes. In silence, without an audience, until it is time. 6 weeks after the settlement, Elmridge Drive sold at full asking price in 11 days. On the day of the closing, I was in my new home office, in the 3-bedroom apartment in Montclair I had selected and furnished and signed the lease on by myself the previous month, with a deposit of $9,200 from my own account, reviewing Clearwater's first quarter numbers. Revenue for that quarter was $81,000. 2 clients had sent referrals. I'd hired a part-time associate named Rihanna Parks, 29 years old, sharp and efficient in a way I recognized immediately as the particular sharpness of a woman who has not yet been told to doubt herself. I was paying her a real salary. I was building something that would outlast this chapter by decades. I did not go back to Elmridge Drive. There was nothing there that required my goodbye. What I had built inside that house was my children, my patience, and a set of skills so precisely honed by 17 years of being dismissed and not looked at that I emerged from that marriage, sharper and more purposeful and more fully myself than I had been on the day I stepped into it. Daniel did not make me. He simply gave me a very long and unobserved runway in which to remember exactly who I had always been. In the weeks following the sale of the house, Daniel sent 2 emails through his attorney. The first asked whether I would be open to a conversation about a modified payment schedule for the Merritt and Associates structured payout. My attorney responded that the schedule was final and court confirmed and that no modification would be considered. The second email, sent 3 weeks after the first, came without an attorney's name on it. It came from Daniel's personal email address on a Sunday evening, and it said, "Caroline, I know I handled things badly. I'd like to talk when you're ready." I read it once. I forwarded it to Susan. I did not respond. This is not because I am unable to forgive or because I am carrying anything that requires that kind of release. I have genuinely and without performance let go of what Daniel did. Forgiveness, for me, is a private act that has nothing to do with the person being forgiven and everything to do with the person doing the forgiving. I released the weight of that marriage in a dozen small and unremarkable moments over the course of a long year. A Thursday afternoon when I booked my own travel for a conference in Chicago, just my name on the reservation, my card on file. A morning when Margot called me from school to tell me she had been accepted to the Regional Youth Orchestra, and I celebrated with her without needing to tell anyone else first. A Sunday when I drove to my parents' house in Columbus with both children and sat at my mother Joyce's kitchen table, while she showed Margot how to sew a button, and I told her, for the first time and in full, everything that had happened. She did not say "I told you so." She poured tea and listened and then said, "Your grandmother would have liked to see this." I asked what she meant. She said, "You running your own thing." Being your own thing. I held that sentence for the rest of the drive home. The thing I want to be honest about is this: the narrative of the quiet woman who outsmarts her husband and walks away victorious can obscure the real texture of what that year was actually like to live inside. It was not a movie. There were evenings when the children were asleep and the apartment was quiet, and the weight of what I had chosen, the aloneness of it, the years that had already passed and the years still ahead, that weight was not light. There were mornings when I woke at 5 and sat at my desk not because I had work to do, but because lying still felt unbearable. There were school pickup lines where other mothers talked about weekend plans with their husbands, and I smiled and said the right things and drove home and sat in the parked car for 4 minutes before going inside. I am not telling you it was easy. I am not telling you that building something in the silence is without its own particular grief. What I am telling you is that it was worth it. Every heavy morning, every quiet evening, every 60 seconds of private satisfaction at a small desk in a guest room. Worth it completely and without qualification. Daniel and Sophie became official publicly in the months after the divorce finalized. I heard through a mutual acquaintance, not from seeking the information. I thought about it for approximately 45 seconds and then returned to the spreadsheet I had been reviewing. She is welcome to him, and I mean that without a single hidden edge beneath it. The man who served me papers across the breakfast table on my 43rd birthday is a man who thought that was a reasonable thing to do. And the life that gets built on that particular foundation belongs entirely to the people who built it. What I want to say to you now, I want to say directly. There is a version of February 14th, 2024, where I am completely unprepared, where I have not spoken to Patricia, where there is no Susan Halliwell, no Clearwater Financial Consulting, no folder of photographed documents in a winter boot, no knowledge of equitable distribution law, no appraisal on file, and no business revenue documented, where I am 43 years old with a 15-year gap in my professional history, 2 children who depend entirely on me, a husband who has a girlfriend and a lawyer, and nothing of my own that I can point to. I know what that morning would have felt like. I felt the beginning of it in the hallway in November of 2022. I know the specific and particular weight of understanding that the person who was supposed to be your partner has been, for a long and quiet time, making you smaller. Not always out of cruelty, but out of something that is in some ways harder to name and harder to forgive. A deep and consistent indifference to who you actually are and what you are actually capable of. I am not going to tell you that weight is easy to carry. It is not. But I am going to tell you, from the other side of it, that you do not have to respond to it immediately or dramatically or publicly. What you need to do is find one person you trust completely and tell them the truth. Then you need to begin, in whatever small and careful and quiet way is available to you, building the thing that belongs entirely and only to you. It does not have to be elaborate. One phone call to a family law attorney for a consultation. One evening spent reading your own financial documents, your own, not your husband's, not the ones he told you not to worry about, with your own eyes for the first time. One email to someone who knew you before you became defined by someone else's life. Small and deliberate, that is how you build a floor that holds. And here is the thing about a floor built that way, carefully, in the quiet, one piece at a time, when no one is watching, it does not give way. When the moment finally comes, when the envelope slides across the table or the door closes or the sentence is said that cannot be unsaid, you are standing on something real. And real is the only thing that matters when everything else is shifting. I am not going to claim that what happened to me was fair, because it was not. I gave 17 years of genuine effort and care and compromise to a marriage that one person had quietly decided was disposable. I gave up a career I was genuinely excellent at. Those are real losses, and I do not minimize them or dress them up as something instructive. They cost me real things that I cannot recover. But I will tell you that the woman who sat at that conference table in Newark in April of 2024, with her folder and her documentation and her composure, was the most completely herself she had been in 15 years. The years of being unseen had not diminished her. They had given her something specific and valuable, unobserved time, unhurried time, time that no one was evaluating or judging or watching, in which to remember with great and patient precision exactly who she had always been before someone else decided she had given enough. Elliot asked me on a Saturday morning recently, while we were making pancakes in the Montclair apartment, whether I was okay. He is 12 years old, and he has, as I said, an uncommon memory for the things people do not say directly. I said, I am better than okay, actually. He looked at me for a moment, the way 12-year-olds do when they are deciding whether to believe what they are hearing. Then he poured too much batter into the pan, and the first pancake was a formless, golden, delicious disaster. And we both laughed, really, simply, completely laughed, in the kitchen of an apartment that is entirely and legally and peacefully mine. That is what the other side of the quiet work feels like. Saturday pancakes. Morning light through windows that belong to you. A number in a bank account that has no one else's name attached to it. A business with your own name on it that you built in stolen hours at a small desk in a house you were told not to worry about. Children who will grow up knowing without needing to be told explicitly what their mother chose to be when it mattered. I will take every last ordinary, hard-won piece of it. All of it. without apology and without looking back. The loudest comebacks are built in silence. I built mine in the guest room and in parking lots and in 12 minutes between school pickup and starting dinner, in a conference room in Newark, where no one saw me coming because no one had ever thought to look. And I will spend the rest of my life being the woman my daughter Margot can look at someday and say, she did not collapse. She waited until she was ready. And then she walked into the room, and she did not move an inch. So I want to ask you one thing before I go, and I am asking it sincerely. Have you ever stayed somewhere too long because you told yourself you had too much to lose if you left? And did you find on the other side of finally leaving that everything you feared losing was something you had already been slowly losing all along without anyone naming it, without it ever making the kind of noise that gets attention? Leave me your answer in the comments. I want to read it. I want to know your version of the hallway and the folder and the moment you decided that silence was not the same thing as staying. To each of you who watched this story all the way to the end, I want you to know that it means something real. You are not just a viewer count or a number in an algorithm. You are a person who decided that a story about a woman refusing to be underestimated deserved your full attention, and that choice reflects something true about you. This community is built entirely of people like that. Women who have been overlooked and quietly, stubbornly refuse to let that be the last word about who they are. Revenge Chronicles exists because we believe every one of those women deserves to have her story told with precision and dignity and without apology. We put out a new story every single day. If today's reached you, please subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a comment. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this right now, share it with her today. Not tomorrow. Right now. We will be here tomorrow with another story, and the day after that, and every day after that. Because the women who build in the quiet deserve an audience. Thank you for being theirs. Thank you for being here. Until tomorrow.